Okay. Perfect. Okay. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the 29th Annual Hopes Conference. We are... we are so excited to have you here this evening, and we have an amazing weekend planned. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to run through a couple quick logistics things. We had some shifting in our schedule, so please reference those print brochures and the website for a current and accurate schedule of events. Please note that despite previous communication, Tim Waterman will be presenting at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. In addition to the advertised speakers, we also have workshops with Nancy Chang and Teresa Moses, a few faculty panels, and presentations from students and invited guests. Please check out our website for descriptions of that programming. If you would like a t-shirt like this one, we'll be running screen printing workshops during lunch on Saturday and Sunday. You can either bring something of your own to screen print on, or we'll have some of these white t-shirts to hand out. We hope that you will be joining us this evening to kick off the conference with an evening mixer hosted at the Gerlinger Alumni Lounge after our keynote speaker. For those of you pursuing continuing education, please be sure to sign in for each presentation at the desk outside labeled AIA Continuing Education. If you're attending online, please use our virtual attendance link posted on our website. Now, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of the people here who made this event happen. I wanted to thank this year's Hopes team, including our financial director, Adele Azeri, our co-directors of speakers, Elise O'Brien and Nina Ben Gershom, our outreach director, Grace O'Brien, our branding director, Maya Merrill, and our logistics director, Abigail Brown. We'd also like to thank contributors Danielle Castledine, Clark Fronglass, CJ Ravenwood, and Lilia Zagorski. I also wanted to thank the faculty and Hopes alumni that advised us throughout this process, including Abraham Kelso, Kelly Kotlowski, Will Smith, and Michael Zaretsky. I wanted to thank our incredible speakers and the wonderful students that will be presenting their work, as well as the faculty that will be leading panels and presentations, and the invited guests that will be sharing their presentations and panels. Finally, I wanted to thank our volunteers in the back, our wonderful caterers, and the amazing technicians that are making this live stream possible. I'd also like to thank the Oregon AIA, who supported us in coordinating the continuing education credits for several presentations. And with that, I'm so excited to welcome you to Hopes 29, Structures in Transition. For those of you that aren't familiar, Hopes is now a 30-year tradition here at the University of Oregon. Started by an interdisciplinary group of students in 1994, Hopes represents the impulse of students here at the University of Oregon to direct our own design educations in the name of a more sustainable future. As times change, so does Hopes, and each year the directing team is tasked with defining what sustainability looks like to them. This year, we wanted to take a moment to reflect on that 30-year legacy. As young designers, we are confronting the impossibility of sustainability within a capitalist society and the challenges of speaking out against systemic injustices wrought by centuries of settler colonialism. New understandings of the institutional structures that design interacts with will empower future professionals and activists alike. Hopes 29 is about embracing change. The world is changing rapidly, but with that disruption comes opportunities, and we, as designers, are uniquely situated to leverage that vitality for good. We have invited an interdisciplinary group of speakers here to lead conversations questioning colonial and white supremacist structures, rethinking economic systems, and radically reimagining the future of design. And with that, I would like to welcome Danielle Castledine and Grace O'Brien to the stage to help us orient in this place.
Hello. I'm Danielle. I hope you're enjoying getting to know the land while you're here. To welcome you to the 29th Hopes Conference, we wanted to introduce you to this place by reflecting on the University of Oregon's location on Kalapuya Ilihi, the unceded land of the tribal groups known as Kalapuya. Between 1851 and 1855, following disastrous epidemics and violence, treaties by the US government dispossessed the Kalapuyan peoples of their indigenous homelands. They forcibly removed people first to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon, and then to either the Siletz or Grand Ronde reservations. In 1954, Congress terminated trust relations with the Grand Ronde, Siletz, Coquel, Coos, Lower Umpqua, Siuslaw, and Klamath tribes. Termination ended federal recognition of affected tribes, dissolved trust lands, and transferred federal jurisdiction over criminal and civil matters on reservations to state authorities. Dissolution of land trusts once again allowed the US government to sell off, mine, or log lands previously promised to tribal nations. Resistance can be found in any story of oppression and colonization. For decades, tribal leaders organized, educated, and fought in the US courts for the legal restoration of tribal sovereignty, and many tribal nations were restored in the 1970s and 1980s. Today, Kalapuya descendants are primarily citizens of the federally recognized Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. I want to highlight the inspiring work of Indigenous groups on campus today, especially the leadership of Chief Jason Yunker and Katie Staton at the Many Nations Longhouse. I highly encourage you to visit while you're here. Thank you to Kirby Brown and his team for their work on Native American Indigenous Studies Advisory Council. The student leadership of the Native American Student Union is a source of inspiration for us, and we're excited about the upcoming 56th annual Mother's Day powwow on May 10th and 11th. We also want to acknowledge and celebrate the valuable contributions and lifelong dedication of Dr. Virginia Beavert, who serves as the elder in residence at the Northwest Indian Language Institute. The Native American Indigenous Studies academic residential community provides significant resources for first-year students, and we recommend exploring their Indigenous UO online interactive map to familiarize yourself with significant sites around the university. Thank you as well to the Museum of Natural and Cultural History for their willingness to work to indigenize the museum and bring light to the issues of cultural preservation and artifact ownership. The museum is a valuable resource for an introduction to the ecology of this place while you are in town. Finally, I want to express gratitude to the Willamette River, whose waters have sustained life for thousands of years. If you can, please visit her banks to introduce yourself while you are here and bask in the beauty of spring's new growth. I cannot stand here before you with attempts to acknowledge the past without also acknowledging the present. The structures that have enabled these historic wrongdoings are not only still present today, but continue to thrive in the destruction of our planet and our collective humanity.
This year, Hopes 29, Structures in Transition, is a call to pause and reflect, to embrace change purposefully and thoughtfully, and to take a collective approach to rematriate our systems of our world. Sovereignty, the right to one's governance, has been a long-fought battle for the Indigenous peoples. In the face of coloniality, Christianity, and capitalism, their activism and history serves as a poignant model for us all. This moment in history, our moment, calls for an ontological shift, one that recenters relationality and connection to community and to ecology. As we bear witness and grieve the perpetual, upheld, exploitative models and operations from the status quo, we invite you to imagine an antidote. We hope this weekend serves as a seed rooted for the liberation of all repressed and dispossessed beings of this planet. Designers have the gift of being visionaries. For the next minute, I invite you to talk to those around you. Please meet someone new and start to create this community here at the UL. Thank you.
Okay. I hope everybody had the chance to meet someone new. But I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening, Jeff Howe. Jeff Howe is a professor of landscape architecture at the University of Washington in Seattle, where he's taught since 2001. He currently serves as the director of the Urban Commons Lab and has previously held roles as the department chair of and graduate programs coordinator for the Department of Landscape Architecture. Professor Howe's research, teaching, and professional practice focus on community design, design activism, public space, and democracy, alongside social and environmental justice. Over the course of his career, he has worked with a diverse range of communities, including indigenous tribes, farmers and fishers in Taiwan, neighborhood residents in Japan, villagers in China, and inner-city immigrant youths and elders in North American cities. His projects have ranged from the conservation of wildlife habitats to the design of urban spaces. He has written extensively on the agency of citizens and communities in shaping built environments. His most recent book, Emerging Civic Urbanisms in Asia, examines the evolving state-civil society relationships and the governance of cities and communities in East Asia. He's also co-founder of the Pacific Rim Community Design Network, which celebrated its 25th anniversary in 2023. His work is recognized with several awards, including the EDRA Great Places Award in 2010, 12, and 18. Jeff has a multidisciplinary background in architecture, landscape architecture, planning, and public art. He received his PhD in environmental planning and Masters of Architecture from the University of California, Berkeley, his Masters of Landscape Architecture from the University of Pennsylvania, and a Bachelor's of Architecture from the Cooper Union. The HOPES team was inspired by Jeff's interdisciplinary background and his work in design activism and collective creativity. When we reached out, Jeff was enthusiastic to support our own little experiment in design activism, noting that he had heard of HOPES during his time at the University of Washington. Jeff has been extraordinarily supportive of our team, and we are so excited to have him here in Eugene. If you enjoyed tonight's presentation, Jeff will also be participating in tomorrow morning's APRU Sustainable Cities panel, Designing the Future, Global Engagement in Design Education, which will be taking place in this room at 11:30. And with that, I would like to welcome Jeff Howe to the stage.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and it's such a pleasure and honor to be back at University of Oregon. I remember I first visited U of O when I was still a graduate student at Berkeley. This was back in, I think, 1997. There was a group of us who came. We met with former Dean Robert Melnick, and along with a bunch of other faculty members. I think Howard was there as well. And it was such a fun experience. And some of you may know that I'm actually retiring from University of Washington formally in a couple of weeks. I have a new position at the National University of Singapore. And so to have this opportunity to come and give a talk here in Lawrence House is almost like coming full circle in my academic career in North America. So thank you for this incredible opportunity. All right, so we are, you saw the title of my talk today. We are living in a time of extraordinary challenges. Climate crisis, political upheaval, societal shift, challenges that have particular ramifications for the most vulnerable population in society and the planet, right, including wildlife species. Challenges that require us to take action to move beyond the status quo, right? To design for change, and that's very much what I want to talk about today. The slides you're looking at here is the landscape declaration that was put forward by the Landscape Architecture Foundation in 2016. It represents a call to action to address some of the most urgent issues, including equity, sustainability, resilience, and democracy. So all the things that I think all of us in this room kind of care about, right? But how can we make change happen, right? What changes are we talking about? What is the role of design to facilitate change? And so in my talk today, I would like to suggest that to catalyze change, right, to make changes happen through design, we must empower design, right? We must connect design to the political process that is necessary to make change happen, right? We must also look at how design and engagement in the design process can serve as a vehicle for empowerment, right? So this is really kind of what I mean by empowering design. One interesting and I should say rather peculiar example of empowerment or empowering design is the work of Kongjian Yu, founder of the firm Terrenscape and the dean of the College of Architecture and Landscape Architecture in Peking University. He wrote letters to political leaders in China, so mayors, governors, party secretary, and even the president, about policy that important to the nation, mostly about the landscape, the city, and so on. And some of those letters apparently did get through, resulting in policies such as that of the Sponge City, that some of you may have heard of, through which large parcel of land have been set aside for green infrastructure, as in the case of the Qinli Stormwater Park in the northern city of Harbin. Kongjian and I are actually good friends, and so this is us doing a book signing together at the one of the ASLA conferences. I think it was back in 2018. You probably have noticed already that our books are very different, right? So Kongjian's book on the left, Letters to the Leaders of China. My co-edited book, along with many colleagues of ours, Design as Democracy. And so we each represent sort of a different approach. His was about leveraging the power of the establishment, right, as a response to the political reality in China, right, or opportunities that might exist in the system. But here in the United States, we have a different kind of political reality, right, which oftentimes is a bit more messy, and the processes that requires to respond differently to leverage the power and institutions of democracy, right? So what I want to do today is to highlight just a few examples, right, using the system that we have in place, right? And I'm going to show you cases in which we have either worked on or have come across in our work in Seattle. So first, for design to have a greater impact than it currently has, we must scale up design, right? We must go upstream, if you will, to the policy planning and even budgeting level. Sometimes it helps to turn a small problem into a much bigger problem in order to effect change. One truly fascinating precedent that I have encountered early on in my career in Seattle was the case of Bryner Gardens Park in the Mount Baker neighborhood in Seattle. This is the park's property that you're looking at, which was purchased in 1971 but was never developed because the city did not have enough funding. The site was used instead as a community garden, so as a kind of ad hoc kind of space. In 1994, unfortunately, the community learned that the city was going to sell the property, and the community decided to organize a campaign to stop the city from doing so. But instead of organizing the community to fight for just one single site, right, the campaign went upstream, working with a coalition of park supporters. The campaign became the Protect Our Park Initiative number 42, which stated that no park's property could be sold in Seattle unless a facility of equal size value, and location could be provided. So basically, it make that sort of exchange almost not worth the effort, right? Because the parks will have to probably spend more money to acquire another property to compensate for the property they're going to sell. The initiative was approved by the Seattle voter, and a city ordinance was approved unanimously by the city council and the mayor in 1997. The law protected not only the Bradner Gardens Parks site, but also all the parks in the city from being potentially sold. So this was quite a feat, right? So this is, you begin to see sort of an example of scaling up. With the ordinance passed, the parks was safe and become one of the most unique green spaces in the city. It still features a community garden, but it's now adorned by many artworks created by neighbors and local artists, as well as a windmill that sort of amplified the park's identity as an urban farm. But and beyond just this particular campaign, so we're talking about like scaling up beyond just one single kind of action. Right? So beyond just the site, the ballot initiative sparked a conversation about the lack of funding support for parks in Seattle, as well as the low percentage of parks and green spaces in Seattle compared to other major cities in North America. And that realization eventually led to another ballot initiative to generate more funding support for parks and green spaces in the city, and that became the Parks Levy Initiative. And I was quite fortunate to have served on the Citizen Oversight Committee from 2004 to 2008, appointed by the City Council. I was much younger back then, as you can see on the right. The levy was so successful that even without direct support from the city by the second round was interested in supporting housing and transportation. And they didn't think that the citizen had the appetite to pass multiple levy at the same time. But to their surprise, this particular initiative was passed in 2008. Adding another $140 million to funding for parks and green spaces with projects throughout the city. And this is part of the strategy to get support in different communities, right, to have different projects sited in different parts of the city, especially in underserved area. And so anyway, to everybody's surprise, this ballot initiative carried 59% of the votes in Seattle. And so there was a clear majority even during the last Great Recession. So scale is important. Scale is manifested by the sheer number of kind of projects and the way that people can realize that this is something that can benefit them. Right? So with just everybody paying just a little bit, you can have a substantial amount of money to support all the projects. So these back-to-back levies over time led to a phenomenal increase in the number of new parks and open spaces in Seattle, ranging from a new variety of community gardens. This one was previously an asphalt parking lot and now has become a beautiful community space. The property was so small that the park space and the community garden have to be fully integrated, right? As you can see in the slides. Another project features a community garden on top of a multi-story parking garage designed by two of our former students. And this project won our state chapter's top design award in 2014, the Up Garden P-Patch. Full Forest, we have outgrown the conventional models of community garden in Seattle and expanded into orchards and full forests. Although the forest is not quite there yet, it's still kind of a work in progress. New waterfront park, the Lake Union Park designed by Hargrave Associates opposite Gasworks Park, also came out of these multiple rounds of levy initiatives. A much larger project such as the continued development of Madison Park that occupy the former site of a naval air station. And today, it has turned into a multifunctional urban park. So Madison Park featuring sports as well as sports field as well as wildlife habitats. And so an effort to save a neighborhood park. So going back to the Brandis Garden Park, so the beginning point of all the things that we have seen since. So that particular kind of effort evolved into a movement that added more than 150 projects to the city, making parks and open spaces more abundant and accessible to everybody, especially those in underserved communities. So again, scale is an important concept in this particular case. Secondly, another way through which we can empower design is to expand our political capacity, right, by organizing, including working with other stakeholders and allies, building coalitions. The multiple levies to create more open spaces in Seattle are already a case in point. The effort to transform our downtown waterfront serve as another great example. This particular project started with the planned removal of a viaduct that was constructed in 1950s and was damaged during the Nisqually earthquake in 2001. So it took a long kind of process for the project to get to this point. In the beginning, the planning process was primarily driven by transportation options. So different ways, basically, of rebuilding the viaduct or bury it underground. Right? So those are the two main options. It wasn't until a group of designers and civil leaders who got together to envision alternative with a stronger focus on public space and shoreline habitat that the public begin to kind of think about potentially kind of different options, right? It was through this particular process that the public discussion concerning the waterfront began to kind of shift. This was a small scale design charrette organized by LA Arts of Seattle, which has been a really important civic organization in Seattle. They were responsible for leading the fight to save the Pike Place Market. So they're trying to do the same thing again on the waterfront. That conversation led to an even larger visioning charrette, this time organized by the city, with 22 different teams formed by design and planning professionals as well as community members and labor unions. The longshoremen were very concerned about future development of waterfront, which may jeopardize their job, and so they tactically inserted at least one member in every single one of the groups. So it's a very strategic kind of organizing tactics on their part. And so we were part of this event as well. Number 12 that you see in the center was the team that I led with a group of our students at the time. And then aside from these kind of more kind of formal outcomes, the multiple charrettes and the kind of policy discussion, another important outcome was actually a grassroots movement led by activist Carrie Moon, who formed the People's Waterfront Coalition and produced evidence against the rebuilding of the freeway through downtown. Right? And that became almost like Carrie's kind of life project since the time, and she really became a civil activist starting at that point. The election of Mike McGinn as the Seattle mayor, who campaigned basically on this one single issue of the waterfront redevelopment, represent a milestone and the beginning of the current waterfront redevelopment that we have seen today. And by the way, this was the first departmental lecture that we hosted when I became the department chair at UW. So we invited mayor to come to our auditorium. The waterfront project in Seattle has won numerous awards even before anything was completed. But if you look at just the rendering of the project, you don't really kind of get a sense of the full sense of the organizing and political processes that got the project to this point, right? And that's really is something that I think as a designer, as a planner, that we need to become more kind of cognizant about. And again, without the political process and the continued attention given to the design, that would not have the opportunity to create an ecological seawall. Right, this is a really kind of a innovative way of kind of rebuilding downtown waterfront, and as well as kind of shoreline stormwater design, which this particular portion of the project received an SLA award in 2017. And then for full disclosure, both Carrie Moon and I serve on the design oversight committee that reviewed the design. This is a more recent photo of the construction. You're looking at the light penetrating surface that would protect the juvenile salmon from their predators as they kind of swim across the waterfront. So it's actually a solution proposed by the project engineers. And the Habitat Beach that was recently opened. Again, none of these would have been possible without the organizing that took place more than 20 years ago, when a group of people got together, to think about, waterfront beyond just the transportation options. Organizing can also and should also happen at the neighborhood level. For the last 20 plus years, a big part of my professional work has focused on the Chinatown International District. It's a historical, multicultural community in Seattle that continues to struggle with many social, economic, and political challenges. And so for the past 20 plus years, at the pace of most kind of one project a year, sometimes two, we have experimented with different ways of engaging the residents as well as community stakeholders with the purpose of not only improving the neighborhood's physical environment, but also using that process as an opportunity to build community capacity, right? Specifically, capacity to participate, right? So that people learn the skill of participation, to collaborate, collaboration among different stakeholders, different community organizations, and also capacity to organize, to address issues that are important to the community. So here, design and design process represent opportunity for engagement through this is one kind of example, a technique that was called photo voice. Basically, we gave, at the time, this is before the smartphones, so we used actual disposable cameras for people to take pictures of what they like and dislike. And really kind of using the photograph as a way for communication, right? A way to have a conversation about what people value in the neighborhood and what issues are, right? And really kind of the picture really kind of speak 1,000 words. And so the technique has been hugely successful. We have also experimented with design game. Specifically, the kind of game that we can embed into the everyday activities in the neighborhood. For example, this was a design game that we developed as part of an ESL class, so English as a second language, that adults in the neighborhood already attended, right? Just like once or twice a week, people show up for classes, and we basically just insert ourselves into the class. We basically designed a lesson around, designing parks, right? And here you see different parks elements that are labeled with both Chinese and English, and so people can pick up the vocab, right? The terms, they thought they were learning English, but also designing a park at the same time, right? So it doesn't require additional effort trying to teach people about the design process. This is something that we can embed into things that they're doing already. And also design game that build on skills and knowledge that community members already have. Here in the Chinatown International District, one of the strongest skill that people have is actually eating a buffet meal, which in our community is more like a competitive sports. This is so you have to make sure that you get in line, like before everybody. Otherwise, there's no food left. Okay, so the game is called Design Buffet. It's probably that one of the most successful workshop that we have ever done. Almost as soon as I announced that the game was going to be like a buffet, everybody got in line. Right? Not wasting time. And they know intuitively what to do. Right? And so they pick up the play at one end of the table. They go through the table. They pick up the different design elements that are arranged like food, this aluminum trays. So we have the buffet line on the left, and then on the right, folks return to the table and begin to create a design that represent kind of what they would like to see in the park, right? And then people start to talk to each other. Conversation happens. And we mix together young people and older adults in the neighborhood, and this way they can begin to kind of see the park from different perspectives. They can create this kind of intergenerational understanding as part of a design game, right? And so this is as much about like really kind of respecting culture in the community, as well as kind of building new skills that people can carry with them as they move through the design process, as they come back to participate in more workshops in the community. All right, so after many years of running studios and doing workshops, as well as kind of applying for grants, we managed to get a few projects built with help from some of our local organizations. This was one of the first projects that we got built, is the Manor Avenue Green Streets, completed in 2010, developed by the Interim Community Development Association. And so this particular project, the concept actually came out of the photo voice interview that I just showed in the slides. And so people talk about the kind of plant textures that remind them of their home, right? They talk about these amenities in public spaces, like places that they can sit. They talk about kind of these kind of clean forms that represent order, right? That make the community seem kind of tidier and kind of more organized. Right. So those got translated into the actual design. Right. Steve Daniel, some of you may know, was actually the one of the designers that kind of took the concept that we developed and translated them into the actual kind of form making. Renovation of the Donnie Chin International Children's Park completed in 2010, and actually 2012. This was the project in which we had the design buffet, so intergenerational design workshop. So even though it's it's a park designed for kids, we want as many people to come and enjoy as well, and then that will actually make the park feel safer because there are always people there, right? And so the design has to account for the needs of older adults as well as like teenagers and younger kids, right? And so intergenerational design workshop was necessary to make that happen. So again, none of these projects could have been realized without organizing. So organizing through, in this particular case, through a friends group that brought people to the meeting, right, to mobilize participation. To help with fundraising, to workshops and one meeting after another, holding designers accountable to input from the community that was collected early on. Right? And so organizing was actually a very critical part of that long process. Idea Space was another organization that we helped establish back in 2008. It began with the vision to become a full-service community design center located in the neighborhood that addressed not only design, but also business assistance, neighborhood safety, and real estate developments. Right? And then in the first 5 years, now it's been around for over 15 years. In the first 5 years alone, it has leveraged over $3 million in funding for projects in the neighborhood, including several parks and open space projects. So the Children's Park project that you saw, that the money was in this part, right? And so this is kind of really kind of an outcome of kind of organizing, right? Another important outcome of organizing was the dense networks of relationship that could be mobilized to take on new projects, right? So with every single project that we do, we are building, the new relationship with different stakeholders, with professionals that are interested in helping, with organizations that might be concerned about the outcome of a particular project, right? And that's so dense networks of relationship begin to kind of snowball, right? And again, could be mobilized to take on new projects and initiatives. So examples including this rather massive hill climb that connects a new housing project, Yesser Terrace, with Little Saigon. And so that the new residents can access the business down the hill, and the existing businesses can benefit from their new customers who live up the hill. Okay. And activation of the historic Canton Alley was another project that we have worked on. The project that was identified by the neighborhood as a priority. Right? And this particular project, we had no funding from the beginning, right? But through organizing events, the alleyway actually was activated before any physical transformation happened. So we did the reverse. We did the activation first, and the actual physical improvement came later after we have demonstrated the impact of the transformation, the activation, the participation of the community. The funding begin to kind of fall into place. One of our more recent and most prominent projects was the expansion of Heng He Park, located in the center of the community. This was also the largest and perhaps most complex project, technically and politically. This was also the project through which we got to work with Terrenscape. So here you see Kong Jian in Seattle, who he actually visited Seattle 3 times to attend all the public meetings and work with our community stakeholders to develop the design. And it turns out that he was actually quite good at it. So not just writing letters to political leaders in China, he can be engaged in our kind of democratic process here as well. Long story short, Heng He Park became perhaps the most successful downtown parks in Seattle today. And I think for the most part, because of all the organizing that happened behind the scene, right? So the organizing, making sure that people come to the meeting, making sure that people have the opportunity to kind of voice their opinion. So all of that provided the designer with access to a much deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities that reside in the neighborhood, right? So they can respond better using design, right? So for example, in this particular picture, you see the terracing landform, right? And so part of the complication for this project is that we have a multicultural community. How do you come up with a design that can respond not to one particular ethnic group, but to as many ethnic groups as possible in the community? So Kong Jian came up with this idea of this kind of image of rice terraces. Right? It's a cultural heritage that is shared throughout Southeast and East Asia. Right? So you can find rice terraces in China, in Vietnam, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Japan, in Taiwan. It's something that we all share as part of our common heritage, right? And that became the kind of the motif for the park. And that would not have happened if he didn't have the opportunity to listen to the neighborhood. And then he also brought in his idea as well. So for example, this gateway really kind of signify sort of a dialogue with that traditional pavilion in the back, right? So that what represent the past, what represent the future, and the gateway has really since become a new landmark for the neighborhood. This was a more recent picture taken during the Lunar New Year celebration earlier this year, and it was just wonderful to see how many young people are like using public space in the neighborhood, doing the things they like to do. The focus on organizing was extended to the way we conducted the post-occupancy evaluation for the parks as well. So instead of relying on technology, there's so many technology that we can use today to collect data. We did the old-fashioned way. We hired interns and recruited volunteers to do the work. And because we saw this as an opportunity to organize and to build capacity, right? So these are the actual logs created by our interns and volunteers. So they went to the park at different times during the day, different day during the week. They counted people. They noted what kind of activity took place in the park, and also who the users are. Right? And this way they became kind of more familiarized with the process of doing post-occupancy evaluation. So they become more educated through this process. Right? We had interns producing maps that visualize the data. Here are the results of the site observation from Hinghei Park. So different times during the day where people are. And also that the different gradient of green represent different age group. So the darker, the older, you can see a bit of kind of intergenerational grouping, which is great, right? So apparently, probably kind of parents and grandparents with kids, right? This is the circulation pattern in the Dongniqing International Children's Park. Based on the data that we collected, you can see that the plaza has really become intensively used and kind of brought people into the park, right? So that was very much kind of intended as part of the design. Record of activities based on the collected data, again using design process, even post-occupancy evaluation as opportunities for organizing. All right, so that was kind of a long one. The third way through which we can empower design is to use design as a vehicle for action, right? To enable people to do things. Rather than waiting for funding or commission, or the steps that might be necessary in the conventional kind of design process, right? It's important for us to think about how design can inspire action, right? To address urgent needs in society, things that we can do right away. Right? The phenomenal amount of mutual aid efforts during the pandemic actually serve as a great example. In Seattle, we had artists who donated their time or were recruited to beautify neighborhoods and support local businesses with their artwork. In the Chinatown International District, there were food deliveries carried out by volunteers and nonprofit organizations to serve the elderly and low-income residents. So inspired by what we saw in the community, a number of us, faculty members and students, including myself in the College of Built Environments, became interested in doing something similar, right? To really kind of to leverage our skills and resources as designers and as somebody who are based in university to serve those in need during COVID. In Seattle, housing was already a crisis before COVID. The lack of adequate access to washing facility to maintain personal hygiene became an additional challenge during COVID. Before the lockdown, folks on the streets still have access to community centers, libraries, public buildings. Those are open for them to use. But one after another, these places were closed during the lockdown, and folks on the streets were left with no place to go. The city of Seattle responded by renting units like this which unfortunately was not only costly to maintain, but they were also vandalized quite easily, right? So, for example, the water dispenser, if it's run out of water, people got frustrated and they basically destroyed it. In March of 2020, and this is in the early days of the lockdown, one of my colleagues, Elizabeth Golden in architecture, came across a request by a homeless advocacy organization called Real Change. And so they were inquiring about whether they can get support from architect designers and landscape architects to address this issue of for the unhoused people to maintain their personal hygiene during COVID. Basically to have a place to wash hands, to clean themselves up. And so a team of us came up with this, basically a DIY solution. So it's a urban hand washing station that anyone can build, host, and make them available to folks on the street. It's a DIY solution that could be implemented easily with parts that anyone can purchase online or off the shelves from a store, right? So there are no, maybe one or two custom-made parts, but the rest of it is something that you can purchase very easily. And so all you have to do is just get all the parts and put it together and connect it to a outdoor hose bit. Right? And you can have water in the sink. And so this is the project that we call Seattle Street Sink. And so here you see me, Tiffany McCoy, who's an organizer for Real Change, Bryce Merriman, who's a landscape architect, also a former student, Rick Muller, who's the current department chair in architecture at UW, and then Jerry Cross, who's the executive director of the Roost Young Adult Shelter, which is used to be just right across the street from our campus. We're missing Elizabeth in this photo, but she is a very important part of the group. Besides the sink, we added a bioretention planter to filter the gray water before it was discharged into the source system. And this is something that is legally required in Seattle. And the planter also was great as a way to beautify the streets. And so our first unit was installed again, just across the street from our campus, outside a young adult shelter, and the unit cost less than $400. Right? It could have been cheaper if we were able to kind of buy it, the parts in bulk, and but that was the initial cost. What was interesting was that almost as soon as we posted the design online on social media, we were approached by another organization in our neighborhood that would like to host a unit. So this was our second unit located in front of the University Heights Community Center. It's just a few blocks away from the university. And the project did not exactly go viral, but it did catch the attention of the Landscape Architecture magazine editor. It helps when you and the editor are Facebook friends, so people see your work. The project was included in the July 2020 issue of the Landscape Architecture magazine. And in the magazine's 100-year history, this is probably like the lowest cost project ever published, $400. Sadly, on the day that the issue came out, our first unit was vandalized. For some reason, all the legs were broken. Later, we realized that why this had happened, and the reason was that the staff at the Roost Young Adult Shelter, they basically just turned off the water after they get off of work. And I think people got frustrated because there's no water coming out of the sink. So we had to remind them that the faucet is actually automatic. It will shut the water down after like 15 or 20 seconds. Right? There's no need to turn off the outdoor hose bit. And actually, it was not the first time that sink was vandalized. It was like one instance in which one of the lakes just came up and just disappeared for no reason. But interestingly, nobody bothered with the plants. Right? The plants were doing so well. So we had to repair the unit, and so Rick started to call the manufacturer because we couldn't get just a lake online. You can buy them as a unit, but you cannot just buy the parts. And so he started to call the manufacturer, and then once they realized that what we're doing, they sent us these boxes of lakes for free. So which is great, and it really shows how this kind of mutual aid effort can be contagious, and design can be enabling. Right, going back to the point I'm trying to get across. All right, so Rick got this unit fixed, and also took the opportunity to make a few improvements, including adding a plug so the water doesn't just flow out. Then we also fortified the connections, make them stronger. We added these marks on the soap bottle, so that we can begin to measure the use of soap as a way to quantify the amount of use for these sinks. Right? So we can actually put a number to this particular project and kind of estimate how many people actually are using these sinks. Later, we actually found out that the city has actually been working with another group. Right? The Seattle Makers. It's a membership-based makerspace and makers community to develop a design that would basically serve the same purpose. This was their version. It's a freestanding, custom-made, high-tech, almost indestructible units. But there's something wrong with this particular design. Right? Can anyone guess? Maybe, yeah. Size of basin could be problematic. We have this sink. We actually realized that people were not just washing hands; they were doing laundries in the sink. And you can imagine, the unhoused people, the kind of needs that they have, right? So obviously, you cannot do that here. But there may be other problems. The real challenge here is that the price tag of this unit is more than $7,000. And it's almost 20 times the cost of our project. And so to this day, I'm not aware of one being built and installed in the city. In contrast, our project is completely open source and freely available online. This is our website. If you go to our website, you can find the drawing, you can find the specs, you can find the instructions that you can build one for yourself. Which is what people have done. So since 2020, our DIY project have multiplied in Seattle and beyond, built and hosted by schools, nonprofits, religious organizations, and so on, serving thousands of people. Right? A group of researchers at the Duke University's Center for Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene and Infectious Disease, they actually call us up and check if they can actually borrow our design, and we say, they be our guests. So they created a program with more than 20 sinks located in public spaces throughout the city of Durham, in North Carolina. So the project like this can allow designers to test ideas, to work with others. They enable people to take action and sometimes coming up with their own solutions to address the issue at hand. Rick and the team have since been working on a 2.0 version. It's much sturdier, using fewer parts, although some of these are more kind of custom made, so they're trying out different things. There's a taller bioretention planter. We sort of underestimated the amount of use in our first version. And so there's actually more water than we expected, so we have to build a larger basin. And then it's also heavier, so it's harder to move, it's more stable. And most importantly, there are no lakes in this version, so that nobody can break them. And it which also allow this to be accessible. right, for people with disability. This is the finished version. They actually turn the sink like 90 degrees so that reduce even more the parts that are necessary. The water just directly flow into the bioretention basin. So we donated this unit to a Sikh temple in Renton, a city just outside Seattle. So while the project was getting attention, it was still not enough to meet the overwhelming needs in the city. So we went back to this idea of scale. In 2021, our homeless advocacy partner, Real Change, worked with members of the Seattle City Council to put the project on the city budget for the following year, and in which $100,000 was allocated to support making publicly accessible sinks throughout the city. So again, actually all the things I've been talking about today, so scaling, organizing, and enabling really kind of come together in this particular project. Right. These are just the location towards the end of 2020, so just within a few months. We have quite a few things already throughout the city. And we know it's not quite enough to meet the overwhelming needs, but in times of emergency, in times of crisis, I think this is something that we should be doing. Right? So let me start to conclude. To empower design is to use design as a vehicle to bring people together, to mobilize their resources, their energy, their imagination to make change happen. Right? As we have seen in many examples in this particular presentation. To empower design, as we have seen in many examples today, we must make the design process more open source and open border as well, to enable a greater range of actors to become involved, to contribute their skills, knowledge, and resources to produce change, right? To become part of the change. If we act alone, our impact will be rather limited. Right? So more engagement, more participation can also mean greater power for change. Next, while we work on the engagement and participation on the ground, we must also consider ways to scale up, right? To work across scales, to connect the different end of the spectrums of power. Right? In the case of the Botanic Gardens Park, to go from this kind of small community garden all the way to a citywide ballot initiative, right, that protects all the similar kind of open spaces throughout the city, and there are hundreds of them. Right? And now to really conclude, as designers, architects, landscape architects, planners, and citizens, to empower the change that we would like to see, we must also empower our own capacity. And the capacity of our allies and communities that we serve. To build our capacity, we must understand better the relationship between design and the social political processes. Right? It's through a critical understanding of these relationships that we can begin and we can become more effective in what we do and bring about the changes that we would like to see. Okay. So if you are interested in learning more, we have a great resource for you. This is a website that my students at UW have constructed as part of a class in conjunction with my Landscape Architecture Foundation Fellowship in 2020. You're welcome to check it out. And along with the website of the Urban Commons that sort of is more of a kind of depository for all the work, repository of all the work that we have done over the years. So I also want to take this opportunity to thank our colleagues, students, community partners in Seattle. None of this work could not have been possible without your contribution, especially those who are watching online. Thank you for all the support. And thank you all in the audience for listening, and thank you again to the student groups, the organizer who have done such a great job in organizing this event. Thank you. And I believe I'm supposed to take a few questions.
Yeah. So we've got a couple questions prepared before we move into audience questions. So I had a quick question.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about like various scales in design and working on scaling up. I'm curious, you started your education in architecture and then moved into landscape and planning.
Uh-huh.
Can you describe that journey for yourself
Yeah.
and sort of what that meant?
Yes. Yeah, that's actually something that's very connected to this idea of scale. So I basically went from the scale of architecture to landscape, right? And my journey was really through actually working in the rural area. I mean, like moving from New York City to the countryside in Taiwan. And as part of my first job, coming out of the school. And all of a sudden I realized, there's another world I did not know before, right? Everything that was the opposite of like Manhattan, right? Opposite of architecture that I was trained to do, right? We had to talk to people. And that was like I don't know, revolutionary coming out of architecture. I hope the field is somewhat different today than like the context I had to go through back in the 1980s. And those were things that we were kind of struggling against. And so I became interested in landscape partly because I was working in the rural area. I was interested in ecology, in natural processes. I see that as sort of an extension of architecture. It's all part of the built environment as a thing that I missed in my undergraduate education. And so I became interested in landscape. I went to Penn. Ian McCall was still teaching at the time. There were a lot of kind of great people at the time, and it was a very eclectic kind of period in the Department of History. And it was a great journey to come all this way. And it also is sort of leading me to my next job. So I'm going to be the department head in architecture at National University of Singapore in about 2 weeks. It's an opportunity for me to kind of bring all the things I've done before and work with another group of people across different disciplines, right? Again, back to the idea of scale. I mean, what's great about landscape architecture education is that you learn about the different scale and how you need to kind of constantly kind of operate between those scales. So not just one scale, right? You see the issues differently if you begin to kind of zoom out, right? But to get things done, you need to kind of zoom back in, right? So constantly kind of go between scale, like zooming in and out was a very important part of my education in landscape. So I encourage you all, folks who are in architecture to, at least, take a landscape architecture class. Like students, in different fields, team up with each other to work on projects together, and there's so much to learn from each other.
Have you faced resistance from the academic world due to your focus on design activism in relation to social and environmental justice? Particularly considering how activism has historically been portrayed as an informality in academia.
Okay. So the struggle within academia, possibly, if you do activism work. Yeah, so I think in retrospect, I've been very, very fortunate to be in Seattle, and like here, I'm sure in Eugene as well. We kind of live in this kind of bubble, right? In which we don't really kind of question the value of activism. It's sort of it's kind of it's in the water that we drink. It's in our blood. Is in our value, right? So I've been very fortunate to be in that kind of environment throughout my academic career. But I can imagine, that outside the bubble, how much struggle it must have been, for people to do the kind of work that we do. And But I think, but even within, like even inside the bubble, I think especially in the last few years, I think we're seeing, like people begin to kind of embrace, activism in even, greater kind of magnitude. But a lot of time is there's a lot of kind of lip service going, like the whole practice of DEI. I don't know what the acronym that you use here. We call it JEDI in our college, right? So we do the things that sounds great, but what is the actual impact on the ground, right? And that for me is the struggle that I have experienced over time. I've been very fortunate to have community partners who share the value, and so that our project can get built, the capacity building model can actually work. But without those partners, none of these projects would have happened. And so to have kind of ally beyond academia, I think is critical for academics. And as academic to be involved in activism, we need to go beyond academia, right? We need to look at the actual impact on the ground, right? So not just like another interesting studio project that we do, right? I think students can learn more once they become engaged in the actual process, right? And so in our department, almost all event studio work with actual clients, either a city agency or a community organization, because we need to make it real for our students, right? And we need to make it real for our community partners as well. And that's it's not easy to do that. So for me, the real struggle is really to make that connection between academia and the outside world. I hope that answers your question.
I guess we have one more question before we'll jump into audience questions.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you talked a lot about the value of organizing. Can you speak a little bit to that specifically in relation to the climate crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with Billy Fleming, who has been one of the leading voice for new Green New Deal. There's a whole movement, right? The Sunrise Movement, right? And that really is that to get a law passed in Congress. Imagine the magnitude of organizing that has to happen to make that work, right? So you need to have people, go and testify, right? You need to organize at the local level. The Sunrise Movement is not just a national movement; it's also a local movement, right? So you need to get law passed, at the city level, at the county level, and so none of that would not have happened kind of without kind of organizing, right? And so to get and really to for the society to like really confront climate crisis. I mean, the political institutions is something that we must kind of work with, right? To change the law, right? To like reduce carbon emission, right? People are not going to do that voluntarily, right? You need to have institutions in place. You have to have a law passed, right? In order to make that happen, you need to kind of organize it at the local level, at the national level. You need to create a coalition of organizations, right? Working with labor unions, like other kind of stakeholders that might be on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? But you need them to really kind of build the momentum, to build the coalition, right? Otherwise, the movement is going to be divided, right? We are not going to be able to accomplish, the things that are necessary to make, the real change happen, right? So organizing is absolutely critical to dealing with climate crisis. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess we can jump into audience questions. Does anyone have anything?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor, for this deeply useful toolkit for organizing ourselves and designing community. One question I had specifically about the idea around design democracy is how you do or do not incorporate more than human voices within these urban ecologies when thinking about design considerations.
About what's the last one?
Design considerations for designing
For
space.
like non-human species?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone in the audience actually knew what I did before I got into academia. So I was actually a environmental activist when I was a student at Berkeley, and we were involved in the campaign to save the critically endangered black-faced spoonbill, who migrates along the East Asian flyway. So between, they actually, in the summertime, they live on this island offshore from border between North and South Korea. And then, in wintertime, they migrate to, coast of Taiwan, coast of Vietnam, Hong Kong, China. And so that was actually a project where I sort of cut my teeth in design activism, in design democracy. And so in order to protect the species, again, they were threatened by a new industrial development on the coast of southwestern coast of Taiwan. We had to come up with an alternative development plan to convince the local people that you could have economic development along with wildlife conservation. Right? And so we developed a model for ecotourism, and we developed there's a whole kind of proposal for the green economy, like really kind of leveraging local agriculture practices, local resources, aquaculture, fishery, to create sort of a new economy and to really can add value to the production that was already happening. And that's actually how we became successful, because we were able to come up with an alternative design. Right? This is also design, right? Designing the local economy, designing they were also the kind of land use plan that we came up with. Design ways that people can integrate conservation with local economic development. If we just fight the industrial development project through the environmental impact assessment process alone, that would not be enough. That we need to build a political support. We need to build support among the local community for a real alternative. Right? And so what was interesting was that when we first took on this project, the local community was actually very divided. Right? There were people for jobs, right? They wanted to have jobs, and the people who wanted whose job might be threatened by the new industrial development. And then we started to have conversation about ecotourism, about ways to ways to create tourism in the local community. And then people started, and this is very Taiwan, that people started to open restaurants right away. Right? The first thing that they do is anything to do with food. So they open restaurants and tourists begin to come. And then people who were on the opposite end of our campaign, so people who were pro-job, pro-economy, pro-development, they realized that instead of waiting for the industrial development to happen, it's actually much quicker for them to make money from opening a restaurant, from hosting tours for people from the outside. And the dynamics started to shift when that happened, right? And so that was actually a design that we provided, and we worked together to develop with the local community. And this was really a case of trying to design for both human and non-human species together. I think as the environment become more urbanized, as the system become more interconnected, I think the opportunity for us to kind of make that argument, right? To connect non-human and human species in a way that that we can all benefit. All right, other questions? Do we have time? Yes. Ken, yeah. My department chair.
Thanks, Jeff. You talked about a lot of cases here today where the outcomes have been really successful. But I also know in a lot of community engagement work, there might be a really strong idea and there might be really strong momentum in the beginning. You might reach the capacity of the community to continue to have interest or political priorities change.
Right.
Can you talk about some of the lessons you may have learned along the way when a project has shifted in that regard? And what's the role of the designer and the design community to either push things forward or to back away?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So I should say that all the success we have had in Seattle was actually built on the mistakes that we have made in Taiwan early on in my career. So I learned all the lessons, all the things not to do in community engagement before I came to Seattle, right? And so, like one of the first community meetings that we organized, only 2 people show up, and those 2 people were actually one is the head of the community association, so he had to be there. And the other was the neighborhood. We have this system of neighborhood manager, neighborhood chief. It's an elected position in Taiwan. He had to be there as well. So two captive audience. And so out of that, we learned that we need to kind of tap ourselves into the community. We need to embed ourselves into the community, right? And so. So the way we work in Chinatown International District, so we first, developing these kind of relationship with our community partners, right? We leverage the things that are already happening in the community, right? So we had done community engagement as part of a Thanksgiving dinner that was already happening. So the hundreds of people already there. We don't have to recruit people. We just show up. We had boards. We had the games that people can respond to. It was wildly successful because people were already there in the room, right? And so that was based on the mistake that we made early on in Taiwan, which we were still seen as outsiders. We timed the meeting, at the wrong moment during the day that people were busy with their lives. So we learned how, instead of a community meeting, we have open house that would last for 2 or 3 hours. People can come at any time during that window of time, right? So a lot of things that we have done today were actually based on the mistake that we have done earlier. This is not to say that we have no challenges. In Seattle, we still struggle quite a bit. One recent example was a studio project that we did focusing on Cal Anderson Park. Right, we had this guerrilla garden that was built as part of the Occupy movements back in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, and the city has been trying to kick the gardeners out because they were not there. They never had any permission to use that space. And the garden activist has been holding on to the garden as a way to get the city to stop doing the sweeps, right? To kick the house people out of the park. And so they were in this kind of standoff for a month and years, and so we volunteer ourselves to provide a space for a dialogue between the city, between different community stakeholders, between the garden activists, And then a week before our studio began, the city came in and took away everything in the gardens. They basically just like kicked people out. And at that point, there was like no way to continue the studio. Like the activists were not interested in talking to the city. The city lost all the credibility, with people who are interested in keeping the garden, and then because this is such a racially kind of sensitive issue, a lot of the communities groups are kind of standing on the sideline. They don't want to be involved. You guys sort it out, so that was a moment in which I realized that this also came out of the studio, that we had outside guests who came to a studio and they were critiquing students' work. The students were really kind of fixated on how can we create a participatory design process to move this thing forward. But one thing that we realized that what we needed, the neighborhood needs at this moment is actually not another participatory design process. What we needed was a reconciliation process. Right? We needed a process to get people to sit together and started to see each other kind of eye to eye, start to have a conversation, start to kind of get over all the the tension and perhaps misunderstanding, the differences of interest, and start to kind of find a way out of this situation, right? So not to jump back into design right away, right? We need a process that allows us to have a conversation first, right? And so that is still a continuing struggle, but at least I think I think we learned something from this process. So like the studio project can completely fail, but I think it's still a great learning process for the students. So don't worry about making a mistake. I mean, I show a lot of successful projects today, but a lot of this was built on all the mistakes that we have done before. So I think we should not be shy away from making mistakes, and I think we make the right choice of continuing with that studio, even though we knew that nothing was going to work. So those are the things that we have done. Yeah. All right, anything else? Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much, Jeff. So next, we'll be headed over to Gerlinger Hall. We have food and drinks for those of you that want to join us. Yeah, we'll walk you over. We've got maps if you don't know where it is. Cool.